What if everything you sacrificed for your family, every dollar, every sleepless night, every ounce of loyalty turned out to be built on a lie? What if one stranger's letter could unravel years of duty and love? Right before the night that was meant to honor them, I stood outside Giovanni's, Cincinnati's finest Italian restaurant, clutching my purse with trembling hands. Inside that leather bag lay two things: a $15,000 gift certificate for my parents' dream vacation to Italy, and an unopened letter that had arrived 3 days ago from someone claiming to know the truth about my family. My name is Rachel Monroe, and at 34, I've spent more nights balancing spreadsheets for my family than I have living my own life. The November wind whipped through downtown Cincinnati as I supervised the final preparations for my parents' 35th wedding anniversary celebration. The private dining room at Giovanni's gleamed with crystal chandeliers and ivory tablecloths, each centerpiece arranged with white roses and baby's breath Mom's favorites, though she'd probably find something wrong with them anyway. I'd arrived at 4:30 p.m., 2 hours before the guests, to ensure everything was perfect. The restaurant manager, Antonio, greeted me with the deference reserved for clients who'd dropped $28,000 on a single evening. That number didn't include the gift certificate tucked safely in my purse, a 2-week Italian vacation that had eaten through my bonus from Fairmont Capital, where I worked 70-hour weeks as a senior financial advisor. "Miss Monroe, the wine selection you requested has been prepared," Antonio said, leading me through the room. The 2015 Barolo, the Prosecco for toasts, and the Pinot Grigio for those who prefer white. I nodded, checking items off my mental list while my phone buzzed incessantly. 3 texts from Mom asking about the flowers, 2 from my brother Ethan claiming he might be late due to an emergency client meeting code for either a poker game or avoiding his bookie, and 1 from my sister Lena asking if she could bring her latest boyfriend, despite the RSVP deadline passing 3 weeks ago. Standing in that pristine room, I couldn't help but think about all the other parties I'd funded over the years. Ethan's law school graduation dinner, even though I knew he'd barely passed the bar exam. Lena's 30th birthday bash last year, where she'd gotten drunk and told everyone I was trying to buy their love because no man wanted mine. The countless holiday dinners where I'd quietly paid the bill while Dad complained about his pension, and Mom lamented how hard life had been since the financial troubles started. Those troubles. I'd been 22, fresh out of Ohio State with my finance degree, when Dad first called me crying. The mortgage was 3 months behind. Mom's medical bills from her gallbladder surgery had piled up. They might lose the house in Oakley where we'd grown up. Without hesitation, I'd emptied my savings account $8,000 I'd scraped together working nights at a campus coffee shop while maintaining my 3.9 GPA. That was 12 years ago. The crisis calls never stopped coming. Ethan's gambling debts that could ruin his career. Lena's failed business ventures, a boutique, a food truck, a jewelry line on Etsy, each one requiring just a small investment from her successful sister. Dad's car breaking down right before Christmas. Mom's sudden need for dental work that insurance wouldn't cover. I'd kept a spreadsheet, $193,000 over 12 years. Not loans, gifts, because family doesn't keep tabs. Mom always said, usually right after cashing another check. My heels clicked against the marble floor as I inspected the place cards. I'd seated myself at the far end, away from the head table where my parents would hold court with Ethan and Lena flanking them like the golden children they'd always been. It was better that way. I could slip out to handle any crises with the kitchen, manage the photographer I'd hired, coordinate with the string quartet scheduled to play during dinner. The letter in my purse seemed to pulse with its own energy. 3 days ago, it had arrived at my condo in German Village, addressed in careful handwriting I didn't recognize. No return address. I'd meant to open it immediately, but Mom had called panicking about the restaurant potentially double booking, and I'd spent the next 72 hours in crisis management mode. "Everything looks wonderful," I told Antonio, though wonderful felt like swallowing glass. "My family will be thrilled." He smiled, that practiced smile of someone who'd seen enough family gatherings to recognize the tension beneath the surface. You've created something special for them, Miss Monroe. Special. I thought about my empty apartment, the wedding dress I'd never wear still hanging in the back of my closet from when Marcus left 2 years ago. You're married to your family, Rachel. There's no room for anyone else. In the vacation days I'd never take because someone always needed something. 6 o'clock was approaching. Soon. The room would fill with relatives who'd pat my shoulder and tell me what a good daughter I was. Friends of my parents who'd mention how lucky they were to have me. While Ethan would hold court with stories from his law firm and Lena would sparkle and charm everyone into forgetting she was unemployed again. I reached into my purse, fingers brushing the envelope. Whatever it contained could wait until after tonight. After I'd given my parents their perfect evening, their perfect gift, their perfect gratitude that would last approximately until the next crisis. The door opened, and I heard my mother's voice, already complaining about parking. I straightened my black cocktail dress, fixed my smile, and prepared to play my role, Rachel Monroe, the reliable one, the one who fixed things, the one who paid for everything and asked for nothing. The letter would have to wait. The past has a way of coloring everything, like coffee spilled across important documents. You can never quite get the stain out. As guests began filtering into Giovanni's, I found myself retreating to the hallway, watching my family perform their well-rehearsed roles through the doorway. Each interaction triggered another memory, another moment when I'd been pushed to the margins of my own family's story. I was 7 when I first understood my place in the Monroe hierarchy. Ethan had just won his Little League championship, and Dad carried him on his shoulders through the house while Mom baked his favorite German chocolate cake. I'd won the school spelling bee that same week, but my certificate stayed in my backpack, forgotten. When I finally showed it to them 3 days later, Mom patted my head absently and said, "That's nice. Sweetie, can you help me with the dishes?" By high school, the pattern was cemented. Ethan, 5 years older, could do no wrong. When he crashed Dad's Buick driving drunk after prom, they covered for him, told the insurance company Dad had been driving. When I graduated valedictorian, they arrived 20 minutes late to the ceremony because Ethan had a hangover from celebrating his college acceptance to a state school that had accepted him off the wait list after Dad made some calls. Lena came along when I was 5, and from the moment she opened her bright blue eyes, she was the baby who could never be held accountable for anything. Failed classes were the teacher's fault. Lost jobs were because bosses were intimidated by her creativity. Her endless string of boyfriends who borrowed money and disappeared were just bad luck in love. And then there was me, reliable Rachel, responsible Rachel, Rachel who started working at 14, babysitting the neighborhood kids while Ethan threw parties when our parents went out. Rachel who tutored Lena through high school while maintaining her own straight A's. Rachel who never asked for money for prom, buying her own dress with coffee shop tips while Mom spent $800 on Lena's. The financial bleeding started gradually. During college, while I worked 4 nights a week at the campus grind, Ethan was calling Dad for money from law school. "Just until my loans come through," he'd say. The loans that somehow never quite covered everything. I'd come home for Christmas my senior year to find notices from the electric company on the kitchen counter, while Ethan's new BMW sat in the driveway, a necessary investment for his career image. I watched through the doorway now as Ethan worked the room, his Tom Ford suit impeccable, his voice booming with confidence as he regaled my parents' friends with some story about a case he'd won. I knew that suit. I'd paid for it last month when he'd claimed he needed it for a big court appearance. Later, I'd learned from a mutual acquaintance that Ethan mostly handled paperwork at his firm, rarely seeing the inside of a courtroom. Lena had arrived fashionably late, of course, draped in a designer dress I recognized from Nordstrom, the one she'd texted me about last week, claiming she needed something appropriate for job interviews. She air-kissed relatives, her laugh tinkling like expensive crystal, while her latest boyfriend, Tyler Taylor, stood awkwardly by the bar. He had that hungry look they all had, the ones who saw Lena as beautiful and fun, not realizing she came with a price tag that someone else always paid. Whoa, Rachel, there you are. Mom's voice cut through my reverie. Diane Monroe, 63, still attractive in that carefully maintained suburban way, her hair freshly colored and styled for tonight. The Weatherbys are asking about you. Come say hello. I followed her, noting how she introduced Ethan as our successful attorney and Lena as our creative spirit, while I was simply Rachel, our daughter who works in finance. The Weatherbys smiled politely, asked about interest rates, then turned back to hear more about Ethan's fictional courtroom victories. The truly painful memories were the quiet ones. The night I'd stayed up until 3 a.m., helping Dad understand his pension options while Ethan was passed out drunk in the next room. The weekend I'd canceled a romantic getaway with Marcus to help Mom through what she claimed was a health scare, but turned out to be anxiety about a party she was planning. The countless family dinners where my achievements, promotions, awards, a feature in Columbus Business First were mentioned in passing before the conversation returned to Ethan's potential or Lena's latest dream. I thought about Marcus's words the night he left. They don't love you, Rachel. They love what you do for them. There's a difference. I'd defended them then, angry and hurt. Family was complicated. I'd said family required sacrifice. But standing here, watching Mom fuss over Lena's hair while Dad clapped Ethan on the back, I wondered if Marcus had seen what I'd been too close to see. In my purse, the letter seemed heavier now, its weight pulling at my shoulder. Who would write to me about my family? What truth could a stranger possibly know that I didn't already suspect in the quiet hours before dawn, when the bills were paid and the crises managed and I was left alone with the echo of my own generosity thrown back at me like small change? Rachel, Dad called out. Robert Monroe, 65, still handsome with his silver hair and golf tan. Stop hiding in corners. Come celebrate with your family. Your family. As if I was somehow separate from it, a satellite orbiting their bright center, useful for resources but never quite part of the main constellation. I smiled, straightened my shoulders, and walked toward them, the letter burning against my hip like a promise of something I wasn't yet ready to name. The valet had just taken my keys when I realized I'd left my phone in the car. 7:45 p.m., and the dinner was set to begin at 8. I sat in the driver's seat of my Lexus, parked now in the structure across from Giovanni's, supposedly retrieving my phone but really stealing a moment of quiet before the performance continued. The letter had been burning a hole in my purse all evening. I pulled it out, studying the envelope again, my name and address written in careful, deliberate script. The paper was expensive, cream-colored stock that felt substantial between my fingers, no return address, but the postmark showed it had been mailed from Columbus, my own city. My hands trembled slightly as I slid my finger under the seal. Inside were 3 pages, handwritten in the same careful script. My eyes went immediately to the signature Harold Fitzgerald. The name rang a distant bell. Dad had worked with a Fitzgerald years ago at the insurance company, before his retirement. Dear Ms. Monroe, you don't know me, but I knew your father during his 23 years at Midwest Mutual. I retired 8 years ago, but recent events have compelled me to reach out to you. What I'm about to share may be difficult to read, but I believe you deserve the truth. So, last month, I encountered your brother Ethan at Scioto Downs Casino. He was intoxicated and losing badly at the poker table. When he ran out of chips, he began bragging loudly about his stupid sister who funded his lifestyle. He claimed your family had been milking the cash cow for over a decade through elaborate deceptions. My stomach clenched. I forced myself to keep reading. According to Ethan, the financial crisis 12 years ago that prompted you to give your parents $8,000 was entirely fabricated. Your parents' mortgage had never been in danger. Your mother's gallbladder surgery was fully covered by insurance. Your father's excellent policy covered 90% of the costs. The bills they showed you were doctored. The parking garage suddenly felt airless. I cracked the window, Cincinnati's humid evening air doing little to ease the tightness in my chest. Ethan went on to detail other deceptions. Your father's car that broke down was actually sold to help pay for Ethan's gambling debts. The dental work your mother needed was cosmetic veneers she wanted. The property tax crisis 3 years ago. Your parents had the money in savings but chose to have you pay it so they could take a cruise to Alaska. What disturbed me most was Ethan's revelation that your parents maintained detailed records of these deceptions in a safety deposit box, apparently as insurance, in case you ever questioned them. They call it their Rachel file. My hands were shaking so badly now I could barely hold the pages steady. I struggled with whether to send this letter, but then Ethan said something that decided it for me. He laughed about the anniversary party you were planning, calling it Rachel's latest attempt to buy a family that actually loves her. He said your parents were already planning their next financial emergency, something about the house needing a new roof timed for just after the party when you'd be feeling generous. I located your address through public records. I apologize for the intrusion into your life, but having watched my own daughter be taken advantage of by her ex-husband for years before learning the truth, I couldn't stand by silent. Your father was a good colleague, but I fear he and your family have lost their way when it comes to you. You seem to be a successful, generous person who deserves better than to be treated as an ATM with a pulse. I have no proof beyond Ethan's drunken confessions, which he likely doesn't remember making, but perhaps this information will help you see patterns you've been too close to recognize. Sincerely, Harold Fitzgerald. The letter fell to my lap. Through the windshield, I could see Giovanni's glowing windows, the shadows of my family's celebration moving behind the glass. My phone showed 7:58 p.m. The Rachel file. They had a file, like I was a business venture, an investment portfolio to be managed and maximized. Every sacrifice replayed in my mind with new clarity. The vacation to Hawaii I'd canceled to cover Lena's emergency move to a new apartment. The promotion dinner I'd missed to help Dad with his urgent computer crisis that turned out to be a forgotten password. The engagement ring Marcus and I had looked at that I'd decided to wait on because Mom needed help with medical bills that were apparently already covered. I thought about calling the restaurant, claiming sudden illness. But no, that would just delay the inevitable. They were probably already discussing the next crisis, the next request, the next withdrawal from the Bank of Rachel. Harold Fitzgerald, a stranger, had shown me more consideration in 3 pages than my family had in 34 years. He'd risked awkwardness, potentially legal issues, to warn someone he'd never met about a truth he'd accidentally discovered. I refolded the letter, placed it back in my purse next to the $15,000 gift certificate. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was about to hand them a fortune for their anniversary while carrying proof that our entire relationship was built on lies. 8:03 p.m. I was late. Mom would make pointed comments. Dad would do that disappointed sigh. Ethan would smirk. Lena would roll her eyes. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care. I stepped out of the car, the letter tucked safely in my purse, and walked toward Giovanni's with a strange new feeling, not quite anger, not quite relief, but something sharp and clean, like breathing winter air after years in a stuffy room. The truth had found me in a stranger's handwriting. Now I had to decide what to do with it. The gift presentation was supposed to be the highlight of the evening, 9:15 p.m., after the entrees had been cleared and before dessert arrived. I stood up, the envelope containing the Italy trip voucher in my hand, and clinked my spoon against my champagne glass. The room quieted, 43 faces turning toward me with polite expectation. I wanted to say a few words about Mom and Dad, I began, my voice steady despite the letter burning in my purse. 35 years of marriage is no small achievement. Here she goes, Ethan muttered loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Rachel's big moment. Several relatives chuckled uncomfortably. He was already 3 scotches in. His tie loosened, that familiar glassy look in his eyes that usually preceded either a gambling binge or a request for money. I continued, I've prepared something special for your anniversary. I held up the envelope, its gold embossing catching the candlelight. A 2-week tour of Italy-Rome, Florence, Venice, the Amalfi Coast, first-class flights, 5-star hotels, private tours, everything you've dreamed about. The room erupted in appropriate oohs and ahs. Mom reached for the envelope, her eyes lighting up, but not with gratitude, with calculation, already planning Instagram posts and bragging rights at her book club. Must be nice, Lena said, her voice carrying that particular tone she'd perfected over the years, sweet on the surface with poison underneath. Having enough money to just throw around on elaborate gifts. Some of us have to worry about rent, but Rachel here can drop, $20 grand like it's nothing. 15,000, I corrected quietly. Oh, only 15,000, Lena laughed, turning to her boyfriend. See, Tyler, that's pocket change for my sister. She probably expenses it somehow. Right. Rachel write it off on taxes as family investment or something. Tyler shifted uncomfortably, but several relatives laughed. Uncle George called out, "Hey, Rachel, I'm family too. Where's my trip?" More laughter. Dad took the envelope, examined it like he was checking for authenticity. This is generous, Rachel, though you know your mother's been having some anxiety about flying lately. We might need to exchange it for something else. Exchange it? Of course. They'd probably try to get cash value, claim the money was needed for something more practical. It's non-refundable, non-transferable, I said. Use it or lose it. Mom's face tightened almost imperceptibly. Well, that's rather controlling, isn't it? Giving a gift with conditions. But then, you always did like to manage everything, didn't you? Even as a child, always needed to be in charge, needed everything your way. That's our Rachel, Ethan added, loosening his tie further. She gives you something with one hand and holds the strings with the other. It's like that time she helped me with my student loans but insisted on seeing my grades every semester, as if I was 12 years old. I wanted to scream that I'd insisted on seeing his grades because he'd been lying about even attending classes, spending the loan money I'd co-signed for at poker tables. But I held my tongue, feeling the familiar suffocation of being the only adult in a room full of emotional children. At least she's trying, Aunt Patricia offered weakly. It's a lovely gesture. Trying, Lena repeated, her voice dripping false sweetness. Yes, Rachel's always trying. Isn't she trying to prove she's better than us? Trying to show everyone how successful she is? Trying to buy her way into being the favorite child, though we all know that ship sailed long ago. She turned to face me directly, her blue eyes glittering with malice. You know what your problem is. Rachel, you think love is transactional. You think if you pay enough, give enough, sacrifice enough, we'll suddenly see you differently. But money doesn't make you interesting. It doesn't make you warm. It just makes you useful. The word hung in the air like a slap. Several guests looked down at their plates. Mom didn't defend me. Dad studied his wine glass. Ethan actually snorted with amusement. Remember Marcus, Lena continued, on a roll now. Even he figured it out eventually. You can't buy a personality. Sis, you can't purchase a family's love. Some of us just have it naturally, and some of us, well, some of us have to pay for the privilege of being included. Lena, that's enough, Mom said, but her tone was mild, almost approving. Though, Rachel, darling, you do have a tendency to make everything about money. This beautiful party, which is lovely. Don't get me wrong, but did we really need all this? The string quartet, the premium wine selection? Sometimes the best gifts don't cost anything at all. This from the woman who'd called me sobbing about needing $3,000 for dental veneers that I now knew were purely cosmetic. You're absolutely right, Mom, I said, my voice surprisingly calm. The best gifts don't cost anything at all, like honesty, loyalty, genuine love. Those are priceless, aren't they? Oh, here we go. Ethan rolled his eyes. Rachel's going to lecture us about family values while she lords her success over everyone. Classic. I looked around at the table at these people who shared my blood, but had never shared my burdens. The letter in my purse felt like it was glowing, pulsing with truth. They were all performing their usual roles: the golden son, the baby princess, the long-suffering parents, while I stood there, checkbook in hand, waiting for my cue to pay for whatever came next. "No lecture," I said quietly. "Just an observation. You're right, Lena. I have been trying to buy something. I see that now." "Finally, some self-awareness." Lena smirked, raising her glass mockingly. The room held its breath, waiting for me to sit down, to apologize, to smooth things over like I always did, to pay the emotional bill along with the literal one. Instead, I remained standing, my hand moving to my purse. My fingers found the letter, its edges sharp against my palm. The room was still waiting for me to crumble, to apologize, to make peace. Instead, I pulled out Harold Fitzgerald's pages, the cream-colored paper catching the light from the chandeliers. "You know what's interesting about trying to buy love," I said, my voice carrying across the silent dining room. "It assumes the sellers are honest about the price. But what if the whole transaction has been fraudulent from the start?" What are you talking about?" Mom's voice had an edge now, the first hint of concern breaking through her usual dismissive tone. "I received a letter 3 days ago," I said, unfolding the pages. "From Harold Fitzgerald. Dad. You remember Harold from Midwest Mutual, don't you?" Dad's face went pale. His wine glass stopped halfway to his lips. "Harold who?" Ethan asked, but his bravado was slipping. The alcohol couldn't quite hide the recognition in his eyes. "Let me read you some highlights," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "According to Ethan, the financial crisis 12 years ago that prompted you to give your parents $8,000 was entirely fabricated. Your parents' mortgage had never been in danger." "This is ridiculous!" Mom started to stand. "Rachel, stop this immediately." But I kept reading. "Your mother's gallbladder surgery was fully covered by insurance. The bills they showed you were doctored." Gasps rippled through the room. Aunt Patricia's mouth fell open. Uncle George set down his fork with a clatter. "Your father's car that broke down was actually sold to help pay for Ethan's gambling debts." "That's a lie!" Ethan shouted, but his face was flushed beyond what the scotch could account for. "Who is this person? Some random stranger making accusations?" "Actually," I said, looking directly at him, "he's someone you met at Scioto Downs Casino last month, when you were drunk, and losing badly." The color drained from Ethan's face completely. I continued reading, my voice steady as a news anchor's. "The property tax crisis 3 years ago. Your parents had the money in savings but chose to have you pay it so they could take a cruise to Alaska." "Rachel, sweetheart." Dad finally found his voice, standing up with his hands raised placatingly. "This is obviously some misunderstanding, someone trying to cause trouble in our family. You can't believe—" "The Rachel file," I interrupted. "That's what you call it. Isn't it the file you keep in your safety deposit box? Documentation of all your lies, all your manipulations, insurance. Ethan called it, in case I ever questioned you." The silence was deafening. Lena's mouth was opening and closing like a fish out of water. Mom had gone rigid, her perfectly manicured nails digging into Dad's arm. "Oh, and here's my favorite part," I said, finding the passage that had burned itself into my memory. "He laughed about the anniversary party you were planning, calling it Rachel's latest attempt to buy a family that actually loves her." Several relatives stood up, whether to leave or to intervene. I couldn't tell, but I wasn't finished. $193,000, I said, setting the letter down and pulling out my phone. "That's what I've given you over 12 years. I keep spreadsheets. Remember, it's what I do. Would you like me to read the itemized list? March 2013, $5,000 for Mom's emergency root canal. October 2014, $8,000 for Ethan's bar exam preparation course. January 2016, $12,000 for Lena's small business loan. Should I continue?" "You're sick," Lena whispered, but her voice was shaking. "Keeping track like that. Family doesn't what?" I cut her off. Family doesn't lie. Family doesn't steal. Family doesn't create elaborate schemes to defraud one member while calling her heartless for keeping records. "Everyone calm down," Uncle George tried to interject. "This is a family matter that should be discussed privately." "No," I said firmly. "They chose to humiliate me publicly, to mock my gifts publicly, to call me cold and controlling and transactional publicly. So publicly is how we'll address the truth." I looked at each of them. Mom, Dad, Ethan, Lena, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time. Harold Fitzgerald, a complete stranger, showed me more kindness and honesty in 3 pages than you've shown me in 34 years. He risked awkwardness, potentially legal problems, to warn me about what you were doing, because he has something you clearly lack: basic human decency. "You're destroying this family," Mom said, her voice cold and hard now, all pretense of maternal warmth gone. "Over money. It always comes back to money with you." "No," I said, folding the letter carefully. "You destroyed this family. I just stopped paying for the privilege of being your victim." The room erupted, relatives talking over each other, some defending me, others trying to calm the situation. Dad was arguing with Uncle George. Mom was crying strategic tears, the kind she deployed when cornered. Ethan was shouting something about slander and lawsuits. Lena was frantically texting on her phone, probably trying to spin this to her boyfriend. But I felt strangely calm, like a weight I'd carried so long I'd forgotten its presence had finally been lifted. The truth was out, spreading through the room like spilled wine, staining everything it touched. The letter went back into my purse, evidence of my liberation. Around me, my family's carefully constructed facade was crumbling, and for the first time in my life, I felt absolutely no obligation to fix it. The chaos had reached its peak when I raised my hand, commanding silence with a gesture I'd never dared use before. Surprisingly, the room quieted, all eyes fixed on me as I reached into my purse once more, this time pulling out my phone. "Before anyone leaves," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a blade, "there are some practical matters to address. You see, I didn't just receive Harold's letter 3 days ago. I also took action." Ethan, who'd been pacing near the bar, froze. "What kind of action?" "The kind that protects me from further fraud," I replied, scrolling through my phone. "As of yesterday morning, I've closed the joint account I maintained for family emergencies. The one you all had access to through various means, the ATM card Dad borrowed and never returned, the online password Mom figured out, the checks Ethan stole from my apartment." "You can't do that." Mom's tears had miraculously dried. "That account has been there for years. We depend on stealing from me." I finished. "Yes, I'm aware. Which brings me to the credit cards. The Visa I co-signed for you. Ethan, supposedly for business expenses, canceled. The MasterCard I got for you. Lena, for emergencies only, also canceled. The American Express Dad's been using as an authorized user as of this morning. You're no longer on the account." "This is financial abuse," Lena shrieked, her face flushed with panic. "You can't just cut us off without warning." I almost laughed at the irony. Financial abuse. That's rich, coming from someone who's been committing actual fraud for over a decade. "We'll sue you," Ethan said, trying to summon his lawyer voice through the scotch. "You can't just—" "Actually, I can," I interrupted. "I've consulted with my own attorney, a real one, not someone who barely passed the bar and spends more time at casinos than courtrooms. Every account is in my name. Every card is my liability. I have every legal right to protect my assets from further theft." I pulled out a manila envelope I'd hidden beneath my purse. "Speaking of legal matters, these are cease and desist letters, one for each of you. If you attempt to contact me for money, use my personal information for any financial purpose, or access any accounts you've previously had unauthorized access to, I will pursue criminal charges for fraud." "Criminal charges!" Dad's voice cracked. "Rachel, we're your parents." "Parents who kept a file documenting their conspiracy to defraud me," I countered. "How do you think that'll play in court, especially with Harold Fitzgerald as a witness to Ethan's drunken confession?" The room was spinning with whispered conversations. Several relatives were already heading for the exits, not wanting to be associated with the unfolding scandal. Others were filming on their phones because of course they were. By tomorrow, this would be all over Facebook, Instagram, the family group chat I'd been excluded from but knew existed. "There's more," I said, commanding attention again. "The house in Oakley, the one I've been paying the property taxes on, I've discovered something interesting. When you refinanced 5 years ago, you put my name on the deed as partial owner. Remember, you said it was for tax purposes." Mom and Dad exchanged panicked looks. "My attorney informs me that as a partial owner who's been paying the taxes, I have significant legal claims. So here's what's going to happen. Either you buy out my share at market value approximately $90,000 based on current assessments, or I'll force a partition sale." "You'd make us sell our home," Mom gasped. "The home you claimed was in foreclosure to steal $8,000 from me. That home, yes, I absolutely would." "This is insane," Ethan said, but his bravado was completely gone now. "You're destroying everything over some letter from a stranger." "No," I said, standing straighter than I ever had in their presence. "I'm destroying nothing. I'm simply stopping the flow of money. If that's all that held us together, then we were never a family at all." I picked up the small leather folder beside my plate, the one containing my individual check for my meal tonight. "This covers my dinner and drinks. The rest of the bill for your guests, your meals, your premium wine selection that's on you. Consider it your first lesson in financial independence." "The party costs $28,000, Dad shouted. We don't have—" "Then you should have thought of that before spending years calling me cold, transactional, and heartless for having boundaries," I replied, "before mocking me tonight for trying to buy your love, even while you were actively selling it." I looked at the Italy trip voucher still lying on the table. Oh, and the anniversary gift. You're right, Mom. The best gifts don't cost anything at all. So here's my real gift to you, the truth. You now get to face each other without my money cushioning your lies. Ethan can't blame his failures on lack of funds. Lena can't pretend she's a free spirit held back by capitalism. And you two, I looked at my parents. You get to discover if 35 years of marriage can survive without a shared scam to bond over. The waitstaff had gathered near the kitchen doors, uncertain whether to bring dessert or call security. Antonio, the manager, stood frozen with a tablet showing the unpaid balance. "Rachel, please." Lena tried one last manipulation, tears streaming down her face. "We're family. We love you." "No," I said quietly. "You loved my money. You loved my usefulness. You loved having someone to blame for your own failures and someone to fund your dreams. But me, the actual person standing here, you never even saw her." I picked up my purse, the letter safe inside my talisman, my proof that strangers could show more compassion than blood relatives. The cease and desist letters remained on the table, white rectangles among the crystal and candlelight, legal barriers replacing familiar bonds. "Goodbye," I said, not waiting for responses, not looking back to see if anyone would try to stop me. They didn't. The November air hit me like a blessing as I pushed through Giovanni's heavy doors. 9:47 p.m. And downtown Cincinnati was alive with its usual Saturday night energy couples heading to bars, groups of friends laughing on street corners, normal people living normal lives without elaborate deceptions and family conspiracies. My heels clicked against the pavement as I walked, not toward the parking garage, but down Vine Street toward Fountain Square. I needed to walk, needed to feel the city around me, needed to remember there was a whole world beyond the suffocating drama I'd just left behind. Behind me, I could hear the restaurant doors burst open. Ethan's voice calling my name with a mix of anger and desperation. I didn't turn around. For the first time in my life, I didn't turn around when my family called. The fountain was lit up in blue and gold, water dancing in patterns that seemed choreographed to some unheard music. I sat on the cold stone edge, my cocktail dress inappropriate for the weather, but I didn't care. My phone was already buzzing incessantly, 23 missed calls, 41 text messages. I turned it off without reading a single one. A couple walked past, the woman laughing at something the man had whispered. They looked young, maybe mid-20s, probably on a date. I wondered if either of them had family who saw them as ATMs. I hoped not. The city lights reflected in the fountain's spray, creating tiny rainbows that appeared and vanished in seconds. I thought about Harold Fitzgerald, probably at home now, maybe wondering if his letter had reached me, if it had made any difference. Tomorrow, I would write to him. Tomorrow, I would thank him for seeing me as a person worth protecting, even though we'd never met. My breath formed small clouds in the cool air. Somewhere behind me, my family was probably scrambling to figure out how to pay for a $28,000 party. Ethan would try to negotiate with the manager. Dad would bluster about suing the restaurant. Mom would cry real tears now, faced with actual consequences. Lena would probably try to flirt her way into a payment plan. None of it was my problem anymore. I stood up, smoothing my dress, and hailed a passing taxi. The driver, an older man with kind eyes and a Bengals cap, asked where to. "German Village," I said, settling into the back seat. "I'm going home." As we drove through the city, I watched the familiar streets pass by with new eyes. Everything looked sharper, clearer, as if I'd been viewing the world through frosted glass that had suddenly been wiped clean. We passed the coffee shop where I'd worked during college, saving every tip while my family spent freely. We passed the office building where Marcus and I had met, where I'd chosen family crisis over love one too many times. My apartment building appeared, its red brick facade warm under the streetlights. I paid the driver, adding a generous tip because I could, because I wanted to, because kindness given freely felt different from money extorted through guilt. The doorman, Eddie, smiled as I entered. "Good evening, Ms. Monroe. Nice night." "It was educational," I said, meaning it. My apartment was exactly as I'd left it, quiet, organized, mine. No family members with spare keys letting themselves in. No surprise visitors with financial emergencies. Just my space, my sanctuary, my life waiting to be lived without the constant drain of fabricated crises. I kicked off my heels, poured myself a glass of wine, and stood at my window looking out over the city. My reflection stared back 34 years old, successful, alone, but not lonely. Not anymore. Loneliness was being surrounded by people who only saw your wallet. Solitude was choosing yourself over those who'd chosen to deceive you. My laptop sat on the coffee table, and I opened it, navigating to my bank's website. The accounts showed healthy balances money that was now truly mine, not pre-spent on whatever emergency my family would have manufactured next. The Italy trip voucher was still valid. Maybe I'd go myself. Spend 2 weeks in Rome and Florence, eating gelato and looking at art, without anyone calling to guilt me home. I thought about the letter again, safe in my purse. Tomorrow. I would frame it, not out of bitterness, but as a reminder that truth can come from unexpected places, that strangers can show more grace than family, that walking away isn't giving up. Sometimes it's growing up. My phone, still turned off, sat silent on the counter. Eventually, I'd have to deal with the aftermath. There would be Flying Monkey's relatives sent to guilt me back into the fold. There would be smear campaigns, my family's version of events spreading through the extended network. There would be attempts to circumvent the cease and desist letters, tests of my resolve. But not tonight. Tonight, I opened a new browser tab and started looking at apartments in other cities. Maybe Chicago, where no one knew me as reliable Rachel. Maybe Seattle, where the rain could wash away the residue of old obligations. Maybe San Diego, where the sun might warm the cold spaces where family love should have been. The city sparkled below, full of possibilities I'd never allowed myself to consider. Every light was a life being lived, a story being written. Mine had just started a new chapter, one where the protagonist finally realized she'd been cast as a supporting character in her own life and decided to rewrite the script. I raised my wine glass to my reflection, to Harold Fitzgerald wherever he was, to the woman I was about to become now that I wasn't funding anyone else's dreams at the expense of my own. Here's to walking out before the celebration began, I whispered to the night, and to finding out what comes after the show. The Cincinnati skyline glittered back, 1,000 lights that asked nothing from me but to appreciate their beauty. For the first time in my adult life, I had no one to save, no crisis to manage, no family emergency to fund. I was free. And that was worth more than all the money I'd ever given away trying to purchase love that was never for sale because it had never existed at all. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'm curious, what would you have done in my situation? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your support means everything. And sharing these stories helps others who might be facing similar situations know they're not alone.